Like some of you watching, I grew up as a young boy learning the story of Jonah and the whale. It's a fun story for kids to learn, but what's the best message that we need to learn from that story? In our mug moment today, Jesus talks about the story of Jonah and shares a great message for us to hear. We start into Matthew 16 today, looking at verses 1 through 4. One day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to test Jesus, demanding that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. Jesus replied, "You know the saying, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow, and red sky in the morning means foul weather all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. Only an evil and adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign, but the only sign I will give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah." Then Jesus left them and went away. In our generation, instead of looking at the colors of the sky to know the weather, we look at the weather app, and it tells us about the weather that is going to be tomorrow. So we can read what the app says, but are we able to see the messages that God wants us to see? Jesus tells them, "I simply give you the sign of the prophet Jonah, and that should be enough." Well, what was the sign of Jonah? Well, Jonah was the prophet who shared the message that led to the people of Nineveh converting from their evil ways of living and instead back towards God. Now, the sign which turned the people to God was not the fact that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. No, that's a cool part of the story, but we never see Jonah mention that to the Ninevites. The sign of Jonah was Jonah himself and the message from God which he shared with the people. The sign is the good news. So what Jesus is saying is that God's sign is Jesus himself and his message of salvation. It's as if Jesus was saying to them, "In me, you're confronted with God and the truth of God. What more could you possibly need? But you're so blind that you cannot see it." Well, what does this ask of us? Well, first, do we recognize the good news from God in the message of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus? Are we receiving the love-filled message that God shared with us? If not, what blinders do we need to take off? Secondly, if we have received that message, then we should now be the ones, like Jonah, who are going to those who are far from God so that we can point people to God by showing them a little Jesus through our lives. We are now the message of hope because of the hope that each of us have. It's pretty cool, isn't it? All right. Go pray and ask God to show you who needs to hear this message of salvation today. Have a blessed day.